Cimoooooooo! What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. So today I'm bringing to you 5 decks you might want to consider picking up for the competitive April 2020 format. Master Rule 5 is right around the corner, and with that comes new life being breathed into the format, with the fact that decks that rely on Fusion, Synchro, and Xyz essentially being able to play as they did prior to Master Rule 4. This could shake things up dramatically, and you might see some older decks that lost a lot of competitive viability really make a resurgence as a result of that. Now, these aren't going to be decks that are already doing well in the competitive scene, so for instance decks like Shaddoll or Invoked variants or anything like that, because I feel like it's kind of obvious how those decks are going to benefit. I more so want to focus on more roguish or sleeper style strategies that not a lot of people are really talking about that could get a huge boost from the new Master Rule in April. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. Now, these decks aren't necessarily in any particular order, so the first deck I want to discuss is DDD. Do you guys remember when DDD was the best deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! For like 2 weeks, and then it just got completely shafted? Well, I guess that's kind of what happens sometimes in this game, but DDD back in its prime was an incredibly powerful and feared deck, and now that we're going into Master Rule 5, which is kind of like going back into Master Rule 3, I think this deck has a lot of potential. And yes, you can say that we have cards like Nibiru, you can say we have hand traps, there's all these different arguments you can make for why not to play DDD specifically. You can just use all those same reasons for why not to play a combo deck. The thing is, we don't know what a 2020 DDD deck will look like. You can say that about all these decks we're going to be talking about. I'm just looking at the decks here that have the most potential, and what's interesting about DDD is that it's actually like kind of on the budget side, considering, you know, there was a structure deck and it's just really easy to access all the cards. I think that's pretty neat. DDD is able to assemble some really powerful combos, and now that you've got link monsters into the mix as well, you have different ways to extend combos, and I think there's a very high potential that someone is going to try to make this deck work, and who knows, it could be a very formidable threat in the 2020 format. We'll just have to see, of course, but if you're looking at all the decks that you could potentially consider for competitive viability, I definitely think DDD is one of them. So keeping with combo decks, the second deck on my list is Infernal. Now, Infernal is a bit of a weird one. Do you guys remember this deck used to be the best deck of the format back in like 2014, 15? It's been a while, but obviously Infernal had a lot more going for it back then. First of all, the game wasn't nearly as fast as it is now. I mean, Infernal I think was like way ahead of its time, which is why it was the best deck in its time. You had cards like Soul Charge, which were legal. Armageddon Knight, I'm pretty sure was at like 3 copies. Firewall Dragon was still legal, and I say Firewall because Infernal had some like Link FTK that was like marginally like viable at some point, but really that was kind of like the last remnants of when Infernal saw any competitive viability. But Infernal is a deck that can easily churn out rank 4s and rank 3s with ease, and so being able to just spam the board with like Leviairs, continuously recur your resources, keep spamming into more Xyz monsters while slowly building your back row with Infernal Barriers and Infernal Breaks, that could be another deck that people might want to go back to when we're in Master Rule 5, and you have the freedom to have as many Xyz monsters as possible without relying on the extra monster zone to provide you with more link zones via link monsters. I think it's a pretty interesting deck. I mean, I think out of all the decks I'm going to be talking about, it probably has like the least likelihood of seeing any chance of play just because it has so many hits against it, but I don't think it's impossible, especially since we have cards like Curious still in the game, which is effectively like the link version of Lavable Chain. I think there's still ways that with Appaloosa and with all of the Infernal trap cards that there can still be a build my board style deck here, and again, yes, similarly to DDD, it can lose to a bunch of different disruptions, but that doesn't take away from the fact that this deck could steal wins if it is built correctly. So I think it's a pretty interesting pick. Again, probably the lowest if I was going to be ranking these, so I figured I'd go ahead and throw it out there. So that's going to do it for the combo decks. Now I want to slow things down a bit to the more control side of things and talk about Paleozoic as my third pick. Paleozoic's a bit of an interesting beast because it's actually been able to like end up being this weird like rogue slash like sleeperish deck that manages to top and win regionals every once in a while. It's very similar in a lot of ways to like Altergeist, but just has like a different play playstyle and does things differently with trap cards than Altergeist would, but it actually still has a lot of firepower behind it because you have cards like Totally Awesome, and all your trap cards that you activate generate advantage because of the Paleozoic monsters. So remember back in the day, Paleozoic was a tier 1 strategy, and one of the things that precluded Paleozoic from being so viable once Link monsters came out was the fact that it was difficult to go into multiple Xyzs to kind of give you a more devastating board state when you wanted to get aggressive. Remember back in the day when Paleozoic would go into like Opabinia, and then you also had Totally Awesome as well. You're able to make multiple rank 2s in a turn, and you weren't reliant on having stuff like Mistar Boy to be able to do that for you. Paleozoic still has a lot of good things going for it, and obviously we do have cards like Lightning Storm and all these different back row hate cards, Evenly Matched, Twin Twister, Red Reboot. I can go on, but the fact that you could have multiple Totally Awesomes to essentially protect your board from those different types of cards while also still being able to generate advantage with all of the trap cards, as well as just all the having access to the entire rank 2 pool, but also now having inclusions like Boral Sword Dragon to be able to close out games when you want to be hyper aggressive and make sure that you don't play this long game that a control deck like Paleozoic typically does. Maybe having access to multiple Xyzs is all this deck needs to start seeing the competitive spotlight once again. I'm not sure, we'll have to see, but Paleozoic definitely has my eyes for sure. Now for my fourth deck, I want to discuss Burning Abyss, or I guess PK Fire, I suppose, since that's probably like one of the best versions of Burning Abyss to ever exist. I'm not talking about the new versions of Burning Abyss that are just like Cherubini Turbo, like 3-axis Dragon Link, or like whatever the Link BA deck is that plays like 4 BA cards. No, I'm talking OG, like 13 BA monsters and like the PK cards. That's the kind of deck that I want to see. This was a very explosive deck back in its prime and was able to churn out rank 3s like no other. You have Dante, you have Breaksword, you have Beatrice, which is still one hell of a card even to the very day. And the thing is, I think this is kind of like an older take on like a deck like Salamangreat, because all the resources essentially recur themselves, albeit just in a different way. But I think that this deck actually has a lot of potential once we're in Master Rule 5 and you're not restricted by your Xyz summoning solely based on your Link markers. I think being able to go into like multiple Dantes and have something like Fire Lake set like the old days, I think that could have some potential depending on the format, or just going the old PK Fire route and just going into all these different crazy combos that the deck could do. The deck was so resilient. It was one of the strongest decks back in its prime, and again, I think this deck has a pretty fair shot at going the distance in a brand new MR5 2020 format. Again, maybe it's been power creep, but Dante has still managed to be relevant even to this very day. So maybe I'm just optimistic, or maybe I'm just nostalgic for the past, but I think there's tons of potential here, and there could be a very powerful deck just waiting to come back from the abyss. And last but not least, my fifth and final deck that I wanted to discuss is ABC. Now, what's interesting is that when you look at all the decks we've talked about in this video, right, they were all a tier 1 threat in their heyday. And when you look at ABC specifically and think about like a throwback to Master Rule 3, and now you think about the fact we're going into Master Rule 5, it's like, wow, that deck was good. Like, ABC Dragon Buster is a hell of a card, one of the best boss monsters in Archetype ever printed. I mean, it's so easy to summon. You have a monster that can just take care of pretty much almost any threat in the game. If it was ever threatened itself, it could just go into its original pieces, and then you could summon not one, but like multiple on the following turn. There might even be ways now to just end on like double Buster in Master Rule 5, just because of all the crazy support, not only that exists in the game now, but in the future. And I think that's why I wanted to specifically save ABC for last in this video, is because in the future, we're getting support that's not necessarily ABC support specifically, but it's generic like machine support or like union monster support that does directly benefit ABC as a result. I think there's like a card that comes out in the new Machina structure deck that's released in April, so not long after we're in Master Rule 5, but then there's also the brand new like union driver that I think is in Eternity Code, which is the next core set we're getting, I think sometime in May. And with all of those cards into consideration, Union Hanger is still at 3. Pretty much all the ABC cards are like at full power at this point. Like, this could be ABC's chance to make the ultimate comeback and really show what a formidable threat it used to be back in the meta. Like, I mean, this deck is crazy. There's so much potential. You can go back to the old days of like Bujinke Tsukiyomi, dump your hand, draw a couple cards, make a buster, and like, that's that still seems pretty good now, even by today's standards. Obviously, we'll just have to see, but I definitely think that if I were to pick one deck on this list to have tons of potential going into Master Rule 5, it would be ABC. Just pick up an ABC core if you haven't already, and if you're going to do that or pick up any of the other decks that I talked about in this video, be sure to use my TCG Player affiliate link, which you can find down in the description. So guys, that's gonna wrap up this video. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think about any other decks that might have very high competitive potential moving into the new format. I really love to hear your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always, subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content, and if you found this video helpful, consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube channel member. Just by showing your support in any way that you can, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.